Hello patrons! In this video I am going to read you the script of a video that I have talked about for a few weeks now that I wrote last month on the subject of an anime called Ninja Resurrection, as well as the studio that created it and a whole bunch of other stuff. It's a long, winding script that I'm quite proud of. I eventually am going to turn this script into a video, but because of the fact that I think that's going to take a long while before that ever happens, I figured some of you probably would be just as happy with just a straight reading of the script. And I'm going to get into explaining why I'm doing it this way and a bunch of other stuff. If you don't care about all that, just skip to the time code, I guess I'll put it on screen, of where the actual reading begins. But first, for the rest of you, let's talk about why. And in order to talk about why, I want to talk about how I prioritize my content. I think this is something that confuses people to no end, and it's especially difficult for me to maintain a consistent communication with my patrons of why I'm working on this or that as opposed to something else. And it comes down to the fact that everybody kind of wants something different from me. And I have a huge number of patrons, obviously a huge number of viewers on YouTube, and the opinions of different people about exactly what they want, what they think I should be prioritizing, what they think I should be doing at any given moment is very different from each other. And so I want to talk about sort of how the priorities get shifted around. Partly this is inspired as well by looking at my subreddit, which I don't look at very often, the Digibro subreddit. It kind of, ever since I created my Discord server, my subreddit became like a negative version, like the photo negative version of the Discord server, where people who are fans of me go to complain about me, essentially. And so it's really interesting how you can get very different perspectives reading the Discord server, reading the Digibro subreddit, reading the actual comments, reading comments on the Patreon, reading the PMs that I get. Everybody has very different expectations. I might get an email that's something to the effect of love everything you're doing, take as long as you need on this month's rants because I'm excited about the Don Jolly videos. Something like that, right? And then I might read something on the subreddit that's like, I can't believe Digibro is 2 whole weeks behind on the rants. What the fuck? How is it possible that he hasn't found time to do this yet, And it's interesting because really I have so many ideas, so much potential content. It vastly outstrips the amount of time I have to do content. To remain both within the realms of physical possibility of there's only so many hours in the day. What can I do with those hours of day? Let's say that I did nothing but work from the second I woke up to the second I went to bed, and let's say I was awake for 16 hours in a day. So, that's the absolute physical limit of how much work could get done. Then we have to consider time for, eating, sleeping, and living my personal life. So, obviously there's more going on in my life than just content production. I have to maintain a house, maintain my own well-being, have to, buy food and do things, so cutting down that, we're left with, let's say, a normal 8-hour work day. So let's say there's 8 hours of work to do in the day. Well, what if I spend 4 of those hours on just the conceptualization stage of a new video? Let's say that I got an idea in my head, I'm working through it. Let's say I'm writing preliminary script ideas or taking notes down, or let's say that I'm talking to somebody about the idea. There's a lot of different ways that the preliminary stages of an idea could be unfolding, right? So let's say that takes up 4 hours of that day. And then I decide to jump right into the production side of it. So let's say I get through writing a script in the course of those next 4 hours. So that's what I've done for a whole day, right? Then we get to the next day. And in the 8 hours time that I have, because nothing came out yesterday, because I was too busy writing this script, I have to ask myself the question of can I convert that script I wrote yesterday into a video today, get it out, and it be satisfying, and then we can, that project is all wrapped and it nicely in a bow. Or maybe I look at it and I say, ooh, this project will actually take several days to do, and I'm behind on getting my patron rewards done, and also I've got, tons of current anime coming out, and if I watched some of those, I could, in the span of today, 3 hours today, get, watch several of these shows, get a video together, and get that out today. And that would definitely satisfy people for a little bit, people who want to hear me talk about anime while they wait for me to work on that other script. Well, let's say that other script that I had the idea for was about an album. I would never actually reach this stage because I know that nobody's going to watch a video I make about an album. Like, it's not going to get any views. Not all of my patrons are going to watch it. It's going to underperform, and it won't have been worth the level of effort I put in. Well, here's the thing. Even just reaching the stage of having thought about something for an hour is enough to be like, oh shit, there goes an hour to having a good idea. And then considering the possibilities of whether or not I could fit this into my schedule and make it, ultimately tossing it aside. So, what I'm trying to say is, I throw away a lot of shit. I have lots of ideas that don't ever make it to the writing stage or the vlogging stage. I have ideas that I can't decide how best to do it, or I think, oh man, I really don't want to do this idea unless I can do it as a fully edited video, but there's no way I have time to do it when I've got all this other stuff going on. And then there's the constant debating over which project to favor over the other. What is the most, what is the most likely to have the biggest positive impact when I release it, So, with something like rants, there's a necessity involved. It's not a question of, how many views is this going to get. It's a question of, I have to have these out before people start getting antsy about not having their rant done yet, within a certain amount of time, hopefully, of, the time that people were expecting their rants to be done, I want to have them done so that they will continue to pledge to the rant tier, and it makes a lot of money, and as long as I can do it and it doesn't diminish too much from my regular content output that, people who don't care about the rants start to feel like, oh, well, I'm not getting anything out of this, Again, everybody wants something a little bit different. Some people would rather I push the rants back as far as possible if it meant that they were going to get more content that they want. Even if they paid for a rant, they might not think that their little 3-minute to 8-minute video is as important as just getting a proper piece of Digibro content. But at the same time, if you're paying for the rants, there's got to be an expectation that they will be done in some kind of timely fashion, Obviously, if I let them build up for multiple months, I will have an impossible amount of rants to do and they'll never get done. So, to even prove that the rants deserve to exist, I have to be able to prove that I can do them and still have this balance, right? Well, then when it comes to the regular content, it becomes a question of what is the best bang for my buck in terms of, working on a project. If I've got an Ari Ferreira video idea, that's a very easy bang for your buck because they're super easy to write and edit, and they get a lot of views, and they satisfy patrons. So that's the kind of rare video that just makes sense, that I can easily jump on and do it right away as long as I'm motivated and I have a good idea for an Ari Ferreira video, which I did for a bunch of its airing. I haven't gone ahead and caught up and finished the show yet because I've been working on other projects that are either things like rants that I have to do or stuff I really wanted to do, which is a lot of what I've done in October. And when you get into the realm of doing things that because I want to do them, then it's much more trepidatious ground. And I guess the way I would put it is that my videos... God, I sound like shit. Ugh, I'm getting this fucking tea. It feels like the burger I ate earlier is rising back up for revenge. What was that?
I feel so stupid.
Why?
Because UPS wasn't trying to reattempt to deliver it to our house.
They're trying to reattempt to deliver it to the...
redeliver it to the Dropbox, and they couldn't do it again. And they're going to try it again tomorrow. So I spent the entire day not leaving the house waiting for this package, and they're so retarded they're gonna try for a third time to drop it off at the same location.
Why are they doing? Why don't they just bring it back to us?
I don't know why they haven't tried to contact me. I don't know why they haven't contacted my dad. It's fucking ridiculous. Like, this is the third time it's been doing this.
It's amazing.
UPS is fucking bullshit. That's all.
There you go. There's one more.
You're gonna record that?
It was already recorded. Like 10 minutes into this
I
vlog.
literally spent all day, like, at home waiting for it. Like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna get my new phone. Oh fuck, cool. No.
Sad face. And they couldn't even do it.
They're trying to deliver it again tomorrow to the Dropbox. The same Dropbox.
Is there any way to get in contact with them?
I mean, I don't have the order number or anything. My dad does, so I contacted him. But
Okay.
like, I don't have the order number. All I have is just the slip that says that they're going to go back again tomorrow.
Gay shit. Anyway. As I was saying, I don't remember what I was talking about. Just that, like, I was gonna talk about how when I release videos that are like episode 1 of a series, in many ways it's like a pitch. It's not so much like, oh, this is definitely the new thing I'm doing. It's like, let's see how this goes. And it's really funny because, you know, in traditional media, usually you literally would have to pitch an idea to a network. The network decides if they think that it's marketable enough. They, you know, take the risk on producing, like, a certain number of episodes. They release those, and depending on how those perform, they'll produce the rest of the season. And it's not that dissimilar for me. Every time I launch a new show, it's kind of like, will this get enough views? Will this get enough attention? Will this draw in enough new patrons for me to justify continuing to do this for as long as possible, you know, until it reaches its endpoint or whatever. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And, like, sometimes I want to give something more of a chance just to see if it will grow over time. Like, okay, well, the first episode did just okay, but maybe if I keep doing it, people will catch on, or they'll want to share it, or they'll get more excited about it. And then, you know, depending on whether or not that happens, I might go forward with it. And there are often times where I will start working on a project kind of thinking, okay, we're going to test, like, this is going to be our next test run. Like, let's see how this one does, and if it does well, we'll keep doing it. But I might get to a point where I know it's not going to do that well, and it's just not worth the amount of effort that's being put into it. So, for instance, at the end of last month, I put out this video called Everything is Late, but There's a Lot. And it's really funny looking back at this post because it's not representative of anything that I've released in October. It is a list of half-finished projects that existed in September that could be finished in October, some of which still will be. But the idea was, like, here's why you haven't gotten a new big edited video, is because all of these ones were competing for my time and none of them got completed. So, like, a big one was this video I was working on for Tactics Ogre. I spent a lot of time over the course of 2 weeks playing Tactics Ogre, taking notes, getting really into the story, to make this big, long video, like it was planned to be, a fucking, you know, possibly hour-long video, just going in depth about what makes the storytelling in this game interesting. And I had already written the first 4 pages of it as sort of like an introduction to the idea of the series. You know, I put a lot of work into playing this game and coming up with ideas for this video. And then it reached a point where a couple of weeks have passed. I'm starting to not be as interested in playing the game because it was getting easier, oddly. And the story was getting harder to follow because really I had this plan to, like, take a pen and paper and write down, like, the names of everybody, all the factions, how everything relates to each other, because the story is really complicated. And I was planning to do all that, but then I ended up finding other interests that I thought would work better. You know, like, oh, well, this is taking forever, and I know this isn't going to get a whole lot of views, you know, no matter what. Like, it's a video about Tactics Ogre. The upper limit is not that high, and even if people were going to get excited about the idea of this as a series from that point, it wouldn't necessarily lead to more views for that particular episode. So it's just kind of like, this is more effort than I think it will be worth, and, you know, I'd like to do it still, but if I have a better idea of something that I know will be more successful or that I know will be a better use of my time, let's pursue that instead. And around then, I think, is when I wrote the Ninja Resurrection video, like around the point where I was, you know, starting to think, okay, let's shelve this Ogre Battle video. Well, Ninja Resurrection video, meanwhile, is a great idea for a video. I think it has potential to get a lot of views, though it's questionable because it's a subject nobody knows anything about. If it got a lot of views, it would be for the same reason the great anime director Who Time Forgot got a lot of views, because it would have a catchy title, the worst anime of my childhood, hopefully a catchy thumbnail, and you know, just the fact that it's this big epic video maybe will cause some word of mouth spread. You know, like when I do big, well-edited videos, they tend to do pretty well. But here's the thing, is that when I did the great anime director Who Time Forgot, I wrote that script, I gave it to the Devu, and he edited it for an entire fucking month. And I've done videos like it before. It's not that I'm not capable of editing this, it's that it will take a long time. You know, like when I think back to Who is Hideaki Anno parts 1 and 2, that was all I released that month. That was all I had time to work on that month, was these two videos. And I want to believe that if I went away to go work on a big video for a while and then came back with a big solid video, that would be something people would be really into. But that did not prove to be the case last year when I, you know, went away to go work on some big videos, and then my patronage suddenly slumped. And, you know, one of the big videos that took a long time to make that Devu had worked on, the Finish or Fail one, didn't turn around that many views. And so it became clear to me that, like, just making a big high effort video is not necessarily going to please everybody. And so I'm like, okay, well, I could work on it in the background while I work on my other content, you know? But the thing is, again, there will always be new ideas. There is a constant flux of new ideas. I'm always thinking of a next idea, a next possibility. And some of those become half-finished projects, some of them become finished projects, and others just fucking pile on and disappear as quickly as they appear in the back of my mind. You know, I've got books full of lists of ideas out there. So I have the Ninja Resurrection video, and I'm thinking about it like, I don't have time to edit this yet. I'll probably do it in October. So as September continues on, I've got a paneled upon video that I just kind of wrote out of the blue. I figured this seems like something that would be really easy to just edit and churn out, but the script actually was longer and a little bit more complicated than I expected it to be. I wasn't completely happy with it after I recorded audio for it, and I thought, okay, well, I'm not sure about this one. Maybe it'll still come out, but maybe it'll just have like really rudimentary editing and just kind of be thrown out there. Kind of like the Metroid Prime video I did earlier this year is another good example of one I spent a lot of time on. Like, I played through the whole game twice, I researched it, I wrote what I thought was a pretty tight and good script, but it came to a point where there was just no way I was ever going to have time to edit it when I was in the middle of moving. So eventually I just kind of slapped it on whatever footage I had and shipped it out there and was like, you know, hopefully this is still enough to be considered good. And, you know, the video got fine reception, it just didn't get any views because none of my gaming content ever gets views. So, like, you see the headspace I find myself in. It's like, yeah, I'm excited to do a video. I might even think I have a great script for a video. But if I know it's not going to get the views, well, you know, let's wait till another one comes along that does get the views before we commit to a month of editing on something, you know, or to a long period of editing. And, you know, of course people are going to say, shouldn't you just hire another editor? Well, the whole reason that I stopped using Devu is that I can't afford to hire an editor at the price that I was hiring him for, because the bottom line is, I don't make enough money off of an individual edited video to justify how much it costs to pay somebody a living wage to edit videos. Not everybody needs to be paid a full living wage or to do anything that complex, but like, to me, the main benefit of hiring Devoo is if I have a super complex script that would take me all month to do, I can give it to him, and he can spend all month doing it. But if he's going to spend all month doing it, I have to pay him a month's salary so that he has time. I can't afford to do that because those videos don't get those view counts. They don't get enough. It's just like what happened to animators back in the, you know, the time when YouTube first started to change, and it became that, you know, as soon as watch time was favored over view counts, animation suddenly suffered because of the fact that, like, you can spend 3 months on making a 3-minute animation and the watch time is going to be dog shit because it's 3 minutes long, even if the view counts are big. In my case, it's like I can get just as many views on something that's not edited as I can on something that's highly edited. It's just a question of how do I want to actually publish this video. So, for instance, in a case like the Ninja Resurrection video, ideally, and when you listen to the script, if you do, you will easily be able to imagine what the editing is supposed to look like. It clearly is meant to have all the different shows I talk about, and in order to gather clips from these shows, first of all, I have to download a ton of obscure 90s OVAs and other bullshit. So I have to track all that stuff down, get it all downloaded, handbrake all the files so that they'll run in Sony Vegas. Then I have to scrub through all these shows and find images that, even if they're only on screen for like 5 seconds, will give you some kind of sense of the tone of this work, of the, like, some of the more striking imagery. Like, potentially, this is a video where every image could look amazing if somebody spent the time to find just the best looking shots of every single show I talk about, and none of the clips can be more than 10 seconds long because of YouTube's rules. So, you know, the absolute minimum amount of effort that I could put into this is going to be 6 edits per minute, 6 clips per minute. But more likely, because I'm going to name drop shows in rapid fire succession, I'm going to need a lot more than that. And then it'll be a question of, like, how much clip do I need for each show? Figuring that out. Can I just download a YouTube trailer of it and fill in enough time? Or can I just use a picture? Am I just going down a rapid fire list? How necessary is the imagery, right? As well as, do I want to put any flair on it? Editing jokes? Do I want to fucking, make my own unique visuals? Do I want to make diagrams or charts or anything like that? All of that comes into editing a big video that does not come into editing, say, an Ari Ferreira video, where I literally just take the episode and chop it up, like, just play 10 seconds, then skip the next 5, and then play the next 10 seconds, and skip the next 5, and play the next 10 seconds, to the rhythm of my talking, and only show stuff if absolutely necessary, like specific stuff. And usually it's easy to show specific stuff because I'm talking about the episode in a linear form, so it's just literally each scene right after another. So much easier to edit. So you see why, if I know I can get, let's say, 200,000 views on Ari Ferreira's Awesomely Bad Part 1, which could be written and edited inside the span of a couple days. I should say Part 1 and 2, because I wrote it all at once and then, edited it over the course of 2 days. So that is, a dead easy project with guaranteed hundreds of thousands of views. Ninja Resurrection video could take a month to edit and could get the same number of views. This is why I can't justify even paying somebody $1,000 to do that when I could just go make the Ari Ferreira video. However, again, I do want to make stuff that I like and think is good. A lot of people will love this Ninja Resurrection video. So the question is it worth going to the trouble to edit it all the way through, or would it be better if I did it, say, Noah Caldwell Gervais style, or Don Jolly style, where he, takes these 40-minute, very deep, very dense scripts and just reads them into the camera. And, like, I've had, and I tell this to people all the time, I had a video, Sword Art Online, an analytical diatribe that's an hour long and has no visuals. It's just footage of me playing Terra Online. This is not my favorite way to release a video. My favorite way is with a full Devu edit. But if that is unreasonable or doesn't seem like something that I can prioritize at the moment, then, you know, is it worth making it? And in the case of this Ninja Resurrection video, I don't want to give up and say it can never have a fully edited version. I'm just going to put out the script version. Even though I think the script version alone would be great. And I think back to things like, you know, like if this was a magazine article, like it wouldn't have anything more than a couple screenshots, you know, and it would still be considered a good article. Everything in the writing is complete. The research is complete, you know. It's just a question of setting it to interesting visuals to make it into a video. And it's kind of a shame in my mind that that's the only way that I think it can gain any traction as a video. But it also is a shame in my mind to not give it the full edit when it could exist and would be the best version. So, you know, I figured I'd split the difference and just record myself reading the script in full for you guys, which, you know, is probably 80% of the experience of the script. And I think, you know, a lot of people will be perfectly fine with this and not even care if a fully edited version ever even came out, but I want it to come out eventually. The reason I decided to do this now is because of, in that thread I was talking about that I saw on the Reddit, there was somebody who posted something like, he was complaining about the rants not being done 2 weeks into October, and also saying something to the effect of, like, all these great, these supposedly great videos he has written that we've seen no sign of. And I thought that was an interesting comment because there were two videos that I was really am excited about. There's one about Vinland Saga and one about Ninja Resurrection. The Vinland Saga video I still fully intend to edit by the end of this month. I wanted to get it done before Don Jolly came over. That did not happen. The reason that did not happen is that I wrote a light novel instead. And the light novel, so I was talking about pitches, right? How, like, when I launched a first episode of something, it's kind of a pitch. How many views is this going to get? Is this sustainable? Is this something I should do more of? So I wrote a pitch, essentially, of this light novel and published it. And it has 43,000 views, which for being what it is a lot. And the response is extremely positive. I got tons of fan art for days. I got tons of people telling me that they want me to, you know, release a physical version, that they'd pay for it. So in my mind, this is by far the best thing I've got going on right now. By far the most lucrative, the highest potential, especially for me as a creator, because I've wanted to get back into fiction writing for a while. Ever since I wrote this light novel in like a day, it sucks and I hate it. That experience, as I talk about in that book, made me want to get back into fiction writing. And I've been trying to do it ever since. I've got tons of, like, couple of first chapters of books laying around. I've got, like, even a half-finished light novel I started earlier this year. Nothing had quite come to fruition. And then I just wrote this thing, and I was like, oh, this thing's actually pretty good. People will probably like this. Let's see if it'll work. So my plan now is I want to write Volume 2 by the end of this month, and I want to launch a Kickstarter to make a physical release of it. Judging by the response that I've gotten towards the story and the idea of a physical release so far, I think there's extreme potential for it to be hugely successful. Not only would it make me a lot of money if I had a hugely successful Kickstarter for this book, but it would be a fucking awesome project, and it would launch the idea of me as a fiction author, which is something I really want. Because me as a musician, which is something I love, doesn't tend to make a whole lot of money. Me as somebody who even makes vlogs and podcasts and videos that aren't about anime, also, you know, you could say my patrons care about that stuff and therefore it makes me a lot of money. But in a direct sense, making a light novel and selling it, if it sells as well as I think it can, could make me a lot of money, you know, and would open up new possibilities in my career for me going forward as an author. So I'm extremely excited to pursue that. So when this month started, the original goal was like, all right, the first thing we're going to do is release a few of these podcasting over PSP episodes while I work on this Vinland Saga video. Instead, I got inspired to write a light novel, did that in the course of a day, then took that light novel the next day and did, all the editing, tightening it up, did a voice read, edited the voice read, drew the characters, all of that took a second day. Then I released it. Then I spent a whole day just looking at the responses to this thing because I was so excited about it. Everything that I was, all my concentration had gone into the story for the last 2 days, and the response was hugely positive. So over the course of the next few days, as I'm watching the response to this light novel, this is where all of my excitement and energy is now going. And on the side, I'm still editing podcasting over PSP episodes and getting ready to work on the Vinland Saga video. But I also know that Don Jolly is coming to my house at the end of the week. And, I'm already planning to hang out with him. I also got some rants recorded in the early part of the month. And, for what we were planning to do was to do this big video on all the Gamera movies. So I had to spend a day watching all the Gamera movies, because there's 3 of them. They're full-length films. It took a while, taking notes on that, doing some extra research. He comes over, and the whole time he's here, obviously I'm hanging out with Don Jolly. I only have 2 days with the guy. He's one of my favorite internet creators, period. I've been heavily involved in his, well, not heavily, but I've been involved in his forums. I've been watching his website. I've been definitely involved in growing him over the course of the last few months. So, it was a really interesting time, and we recorded a bunch of shit together while he was here. Well then, once he was gone, I had to edit that shit. And I wanted to take care of it all because I thought it was good products. I wanted it all to come out quickly. And I ran into a bunch of technological issues in the process of getting that done, where for some reason YouTube was having these errors with uploads. It was a pain in the ass. But eventually I got all of it out. And then it was like, now I have to do rants. Because the rants are falling behind. If I don't do the rants, they're going to keep falling behind. People are starting to complain. This is thread on Reddit complaining about it and everything. And then there's that comment about, where's all this amazing content Digibro was talking about at the end of last month? And I was thinking, well, where do you think it went? I released the light novel, and you can see that there was at least 2 days of work went into that. And then I worked with Don Jolly for 2 days and then spent the time editing those videos. And then now that I've done the rants, that always takes a few days because there's fucking 100 of them, just the sheer amount of time. And a lot of them require me to watch something in order to talk about them. So between all of that and also I think we might have recorded 1 or 2 podcasting over PSPs in that time. I have 2 unedited ones that I have not released yet. So at least one of those was recorded in the span of this period. Was there anything else I released? Oh yeah, I was also in order to try to keep anime content coming out on the channel while Don Jolly content was coming out, I was hoping to release a bunch of reactions to new shows. So I did that one, the unexpectedly good new shows, and then I watched 8 more shows and never found time to talk about them. So I've got again, this is preliminary work for a video that has been done, but there's no video because I didn't end up finding time to record the clips between the other stuff I was doing. And now I'm at a stage where all those shows have new episodes out. So if I wanted to talk about them, I have to do even more preliminary work before I talk about them, and even more shows are out still. And meanwhile, I still want to write Volume 2 of my light novel, which is what I'm most excited about. I still had to get all the fucking rants done. I've got the rants for the next month coming up, and I gotta get this goddamn Vinland Saga video done. So in light of all that, there is no fucking chance the Ninja Resurrection video is coming out this month. I would be surprised if it came out next month, because the Vinland Saga video still has to get done. The Panel de Pon video is still in development hell, I guess. Do I still want to use the 2 weeks I spent on the Tactics Ogre video to finish that one? Because that's a lot of time commitment was put into that, What about, I feel like there was something else that was in that list. there's just a lot of stuff. And when I pare it all back and I look at it and I say, okay, let's prioritize. What is the most important thing to get done before October is over? In my opinion, volume 2 of my light novel. Because once that's written, I can launch the Kickstarter. And once the Kickstarter's been launched, Schrodinger's money gains definition. Because there's a huge potential that this will be a really successful Kickstarter, that it will really launch me into the ability to be a novelist, and even just the confidence boost that I would get from doing that would be enough to help me to commit to writing more. Like, writing the first book and seeing the response to that immediately caused me to plan out the rest of the series and get tons of ideas together to continue writing these light novels. But I basically held myself back and said, don't start writing until you've gotten at least the rants done, or else it's never going to get done, because you're going to get too excited about writing, and you're just going to launch the Kickstarter, and you're going to be writing, and nothing that you said was going to happen is going to happen. But even still, if I do the light novel, let's say it takes 4 days. Let's say it takes 2 days to write and 2 days to do all the other shit, right? Let's say it takes 4 days to do that, starting from tomorrow, which is the 22nd. So that's 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th. That would put me to the 25th. Now, Best Guy Ever and his girlfriend are coming over on the 29th, I think, to hang out for a few days. And we're going to be producing content together then. So that leaves a window of 4 or 5 days where I can do the Vinland Saga video, do the now 3 months of care packs, one of which is basically done, I just haven't shipped it out yet, but the 2 extra months of care packs that I want to redesign the care packs before I do, because I've been meaning to redesign the care packs for a while. I want to do that before I release this, and to do the next month of rants, the October rants. The September rants were all late. The October rants don't have to be late. Can all of that get done in 4 days? If not, what's going to get pushed back? Well, let's say I do half the rants and the Vinland Saga video and release the 1 care pack that's basically complete. And then let's say that the other half of the rants are done immediately after Nate and Michelle leave, as well as the last care pack. And, Volume 2 of the Kickstarter will have already been, and the Kickstarter will already be out, so that'll be doing itself. Let's just say all that's going on, right? Then, Ninja Resurrection, when does that happen? Probably well into next month, if it hasn't been pushed out by another better idea by that time. But there's also the possibility I release Volume 2, the Kickstarter is such a huge success that I'm like, fuck it, I'm just gonna write the whole rest of the goddamn series. My point is that when things get pushed back, when things don't come out on time, even when there's a long silence, it's because something else came up. It's always because there was another idea. Something else was even more interesting. Something else seemed like a better idea. Something else was just more possible to do in the time frame that I had. It was more exciting because somebody came to my house who I don't always get to see, or I was inspired in a fit of, just coming up with great ideas and not wanting to stop. Or I launched into something and it didn't pan out. So, I guess the reason I'm making this video is that if there's one thing that I feel I have a bragging right to, it is my work ethic. It's the amount of content I put out, the amount of time I spend thinking about my job, coming up with ideas, realizing ideas, and working. And, Devu very powerfully told me once that the reason he thought he couldn't do what I do is because he didn't have the capacity to spend as much time just thinking about shit to talk about in videos. That it's obvious that even when I'm not literally working on a video, I'm thinking of ideas for videos. I'm thinking about analysis. I'm thinking about, how I would present different points if I made them. Just in the last few days, Clipping put out a new album that I could write a fully edited video about if I wanted to, but I know it won't get any views. I even thought about what if I did it and gave it to Fantano and asked him to put it on his channel, but it's such an amount of time that would be spent on something that's not a sure thing at all, you know? The new Richard Dawson album I could also probably do a whole video about. I thought about maybe I should come up with a system for vlogging all this stuff. Like, come up with some system where every day I just sit down and like dump all the ideas I've had into a camera. But then I also thought about how a lot of these stuff would be good to talk about on the 2 weeks review, which itself is a way of basically justifying all the time I spend in my life by turning it into some form of content. So, like, from my perspective, it's like, I'm always fucking working on content. I'm always thinking about content. I'm always trying to figure out the content. You know, by the end of October, or by the end of September rather, I had 3 scripts lined up. One of them for a 40-minute video, one for a 20-minute video, and one for a 13-minute video. All told, it's a lot of fucking content if it gets turned into videos, you know? But one of them kept getting pushed back because it was, well, the Vinland Saga one I really don't have a great excuse for. Honestly, it just keeps getting pushed back because, partly at first because I was restructuring the script over and over again because I just didn't like the way it came out initially. And then because I didn't want to edit it and at this point, too much time had passed and I was worried that making an episode specifically about episode 7 of Vinland Saga would be weird. And it still will be, but nonetheless, I still think it's a good idea for a video because it's much more general than just being about Vinland Saga. The reason I'm not releasing that one script style is that I am confident I could edit it in a couple days. I already started on it. You know, a Panel de Pon video that's whatever, and then this Ninja Resurrection video. Alright, I feel like I'm going around in circles at this point. This too is a video that I sit around and think about how am I going to go about talking about this, and then I realize that there's just so many angles of approach when it comes to talking about my content. There's so much that goes into why I change my mind about stuff over time, and like being divorced from the moment I actually made the decision also makes it harder to remember like exactly why this idea was better than that idea. I just want to communicate mostly, I guess, in my defense, that there's always something going on. It's always either I'm coming up with a new idea, I'm writing the new idea, I'm editing the new idea, or I'm, you know, reacting to the reaction to the new idea. There's not a lot of downtime, and, you know, it almost feels, there's a thing that my ex-girlfriend used to say to me, that she would always bitch and whine about, like, different creators not having put out a video. Like, she'd be like, where's the new fucking whatever video? And I'd be like, well, the episode only came out, like, today. Or, like, you know, maybe they're putting together something that takes a little bit more time. And she would say, like, insist that from her perspective, videos just appeared magically. That, like, she could not conceive of the time that went into making the video. It just seemed to arrive at some point. And it's almost, I feel like people have in their mind when they see a new video, like, oh, that's what Digibro is doing today. And it's like, no, this is probably the result of a lot of build-up over a lot of time. It probably was shifted here and there in delivery, you know, unless it was something that just was like an all-at-once fucking mindgasm, which sometimes happens, especially if it seems like a good enough idea to justify it. But, you know, it was just so funny to me to, like, read, like, where are those scripts that Digi talked about? When I'm like, but you saw that I put out a light novel and 3 collaborative podcasts with a guy who was at my house for days, and, you know, all this other stuff that I'm editing. When could I physically possibly have had time to do those scripts? If you're saying that you think those should have been prioritized over what was prioritized, that's an argument we can have. And I can explain my decisions, you can decide whether or not you agree with those decisions. But, like, just the thought that, like, it would even have been possible to have done all of it at once, it would not have been. It would not have been physically possible to do more than what was coming out. Something always has to get pushed back for something new to take its place. So, with all of that said, I hope you will enjoy listening to the Ninja Resurrection script. This is, I'm just going to do it in the style of like a Don Jolly video where it's me reading the script to you, and, hopefully before too very long, we'll be able to see this as a fully fledged, edited video in the future, but it definitely is not my top priority right now. Testing. You are about to listen to a preliminary reading of my script for the video, The Worst Anime of My Childhood. Warning! This video is about an incredibly violent film that basically traumatized me as a kid with its bleak imagery, intense sexual violence, and just sheer brutality. I'm going to show you a lot of that stuff, so consider that before you continue watching. For most of my teen years, if you had asked me what was the worst anime I'd ever seen, I would have responded with Ninja Resurrection. It would eventually have been so long since I'd seen it that I couldn't even remember it well enough to know just how bad it was. But when I first started to use a 10 scale to rate the anime I'd completed, I made a whole to-do out of giving Ninja Resurrection a -2. You could say that it had offended and even traumatized me to a greater extent than any other anime I'd seen at the time. So I had a unique brand of ire towards it. Rewatching the 2-episode OVA today, I actually kind of really like it. To explain both why I hated it so much when I saw it at age 13 and why I found myself enjoying it at age 28, I need to explain both the context of how it was originally presented to me, as well as how I've changed as a person over the last 15 years. For starters, let's get to the bottom of exactly what Ninja Resurrection is. Created in 1997, there were 2 40-minute episodes produced for this OVA series by Studio Phoenix Entertainment out of an unknown number of planned episodes. The series was clearly cancelled. However, as many OVAs from the 90s were often... Oh, God, I fucked that up. The series was clearly cancelled, however, as many OVAs from the 90s often were. High-budget home video releases had been a massively successful industry in the late 80s, before the Japanese economic bubble burst. One of the few ways in which 90s films and OVAs were able to sometimes live up to the status of their 80s forebears was in the burgeoning rental market for anime in the UK and United States. Enough people had taken home Ghost in the Shell, Akira, Ninja Scroll, and later stuff like Evangelion or even Tenchi and Love Hina, that it was seen as reasonable to bring even relatively shoddy OVAs to America for sale and rent because people might take it home in the vain hopes of finding another classic. Results were extremely mixed. Ninja Resurrection could never have amounted to much more than a curiosity, if only for the fact that it wasn't successful enough even to get completed. Before I even start telling you whether or not it's something you might enjoy watching for yourself, I have to acknowledge that there flat out is not an ending, nor does it even feel like we've made it far into the story by the end of episode 2. I have to imagine there were intended to be 6 or 7 episodes in the vein of Giant Robo, but even as I say that, I want to make clear that comparisons to Giant Robo, in terms of what the OVA was trying to accomplish, are not entirely unwarranted. I think this OVA was low-key extremely ambitious, and just either wasn't interesting enough to enough people to be successful, or simply came out too long into Japan's economic crash that pulverized the 90s industry for anyone to have money to spend on it. And frankly, it can't reach the heights of even what is present in the very first episode of Giant Robo, but in fairness, Yasuhiro Imagawa was a lot more experienced when he made that show than director Urata Yasunori was when he made Ninja Resurrection, which was only his second major credit after having been the chief animation director on Giant Robo. That's a pretty central role to a series which absolutely excels in that category, so I hope the cross-reference has your ears perked for more about Ninja Resurrection, as it should. Gonna take just a second to put another one of these rants into the render box here. I'm currently rendering the last 3 rants of September as I record this here on October 21st. So let me just go ahead and start rendering rant number 86. And then we'll continue with our reading. So we're speaking about a man named Urata Yasunori. Before Giant Robo, he'd also done episode direction for Venus Wars, Patlabor, Yawara, some weird mecha kids show, including a Tetsujin 28 modernization from the early 90s that I've never even seen mentioned before, Akiyuki Shinbo's Metal Fighter Miku, and baseball classic Princess Nine, handled by the studio he seemed to soon become chief director for, Phoenix Entertainment. We'll talk about all of this in more depth later, but for now let's focus on the movie in question. Ninja Resurrection is in fact an adaptation of a classic Japanese literary novel released in 1967 by prolific ninja author Futaro Yamada. If you've ever heard of this man, it's most likely because he also wrote the Koga Ninja Scrolls, which have had popular adaptations in the form of a long-running manga, several anime seasons adapting that manga, I'm talking about Basilisk, and a live-action film adaptation of the novel called Shinobi. Futaro Yamada wrote a fuckload of other novels after debuting with that one in 1959, and the vast majority of them were about ninjas and involving elements of Japanese history and folklore. If Ninja Resurrection's source material, Makai Tensho, is anything like its anime adaptation, then it's probably safe to assume that Futaro Yamada's novels were incredibly fucked up. It wouldn't even surprise me to discover this because Futaro Yamada was able to become a novelist after having been recognized by Edogawa Rampo. Now, Rampo himself was one of the most influential and popular authors in contemporary Japanese literature, credited with defining the style of Japanese mystery writing for decades to come. But hearing him described this way doesn't exactly do justice to his almost psychologically aggressive writing style designed to bend the reader's mind, and the graphic themes, twists, and imagery depicted in his work. Rampo is also credited as the creator of the Ero-Guro movement in Japanese literature, which would translate to movements across the spectrum of visual entertainment in the form of adaptation and homage over the decades. If it seems insane that something as conceptually intense as Ero-Guro could have been such a central facet of Japanese culture, you need to consider the following. Firstly, that Japan was a very sexually intense place until the mid-1900s, with a military known to have raped their way through China and Korea during World War II, and with dismal stories shaping their mythology. Their modernization and development of a new identity involved not only drawing attention to the evils and horrors of their culture and history, but also putting on display the trauma that their entire country had seared into their souls from the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the nuclear fallout which caused countless deformities and illnesses across the country. Ero-Guro wasn't necessarily meant to be sexy or titillating, but horrifying. If it aroused you, it expected you to think about how it spoke to your nature as a bestial human to feel that way. It was meant to commentate on the horrors of man, uniquely understood by this culture that was mutated and destroyed by the bombs. It also wasn't necessarily trying to be as violent or as shocking as possible, but to use those elements to unnerve the reader over the course of a captivating mystery thriller storyline. But the lineage of Ero-Guro and its cinematic adaptations makes a direct through line both to live-action Z-cinema such as Takashi Miike, which was sometimes literally funded by the Yakuza and went out of its way to be totally fucking insane, and anime, which had really pushed sexual, violent, and psychotic elements to the forefront because the abstraction of animation allowed it to be even palatable enough for consumption. And every time something was successful by way of pushing the envelope of violence and sexuality, it meant that something else had to come along and push things even farther. Enter Phoenix Entertainment Studios. They got their start making Urotsuki Doji. Explaining what Urotsuki Doji is exactly is a story in and of itself, but if you've seen the movie and feel similarly about it to how I do, then it'll probably give you a good sense of how you'll feel about Ninja Resurrection. Personally, Urotsuki Doji is one of my outright favorite anime films. It is aesthetically absolutely incredible, with crazy monster design, color work, awesome animation everywhere, a totally ludicrous and over-the-top apocalyptic narrative reminiscent of Devilman, and tons of rampant sexual content. While the movie is hard to treat just as pornography, since sexual scenarios are almost always immediately followed by truly horrifying scenes of intense violence and horror, it's still definitely easy to classify as pornography, and this was incredibly alluring to Western fans who were introduced to the 1987 film. Truthfully, Urotsuki Doji seems like an insanely ballsy release, and is really the only thing of its kind, a serious feature-length film made for theaters with movie-quality animation that goes way farther with its violent and sexual content than any other film that visually engaging. It was produced by Yoshinobu Nishizaki, who co-created arguably the most important TV anime of all time, Space Battleship Yamato, which he produced many releases of. However, he also produced Odin, which is known for being an insane clusterfuck with way too many resources behind it. Urotsuki Doji could be called that too, I guess, but it's just so utterly insane that it works for itself. It was written by absolute madman Sho Aikawa, who would go on to write things like Neo-Ranga, the original Fullmetal Alchemist adaptation, Concrete Revolutio, and many other batshit insane anime series. Now let's take another moment for me to render the very last of these rants. This is the last interruption of this nature we'll have in this little special Patreon exclusive video. You know, I figure since it's Patreon exclusive, you guys might want to get all intimate and behind the scenes with me as I struggle to try to multitask and do as many different things that need to get done as possible at the same time. No, not 86, 87. Okay. Now let's go ahead and throw those ones that we just rendered into YouTube so it can start uploading them while I'm talking, and then we'll be right back to the video. For what it's worth, Urotsuki Doji's existence wasn't totally unprecedented. It was based on a popular pornographic manga that started in 1986, and they would end up making tons of OVAs, adapting it and readapting it weirdly. The gamble of bringing this over-the-top and insanely racy story beautifully to life seemed to pay off, too, because Urotsuki Doji was another hugely important show to bringing edgy adult animation to home video in the US and UK, and eventually leading to the anime boom that brought viewers like me into the fold in the early 2000s. Phoenix Entertainment would not immediately attempt to cash in on the success of their Eroguro masterwork, however, nor even the main creative staff at the heart of Urotsuki Doji. Rather, two of the producers who got their starts on that film would become executives on the production of one of the most ambitious OVA projects ever completed, and easily the best OVA series of the 90s, Giant Robo the Animation. Directed by the legend Yasuhiro Imagawa, intersected by his making the first and most beloved of the 90s spin-off Gundam series, Mobile Fighter G Gundam in 1994, it was a 7-episode tour de force which took from 92 through 98 to release in full, going over time and over budget in the process. Based on one of the oldest and most classic giant robot manga in existence and incorporating other works from the author's catalog, it is often seen as both Imagawa's masterpiece and the ultimate modernization of the strengths of older robot stories. While it had dark moments and elements of fan service, it was worlds apart from the Eroguro style of Urotsuki Doji, and is all around a much more respected work with a devoted cult fan base. But as much as people love Giant Robo, the success of the series is mostly attributed to fans by the clarity of personal vision from director Yasuhiro Imagawa. So little is said about Phoenix Entertainment, that when I saw their name as the studio behind Ninja Resurrection, I thought that I had never heard of them. Phoenix Entertainment has a weird trajectory over the course of the 90s. What few productions they helmed shared more producers than leading creative staff, at least until the back end of the decade. Alongside Giant Robo, which ran through the bulk of the decade's midsection, they produced a couple more pornographic OVAs. One of those was a 5-episode adaptation of another manga from Urotsuki Doji author Toshio Maeda, this one called Geto Gakuen, released in Japan in 1995, and making it to the US in 1999 on VHS and DVD apparently as late as 2012. While I wouldn't be surprised if this OVA was also pretty good, it doesn't share creative staff with the Urotsuki Doji film. Nonetheless, it made perfect sense for Phoenix to adapt this story, not only because they'd already been successful with the authors of other original work, but because his manga La Blue Girl also had an anime adaptation by Studio Dandelion, which was just as influential. Obviously, Geto Gakuen didn't have nearly the same success as the other adaptations, possibly just because it came out late enough that the anime's presence in the West was already shifting away from crazy sex and violence of the early 90s rental scene, and into the increased presence of TV anime like Pokemon, Sailor Moon, and Dragon Ball Z on mainstream worldwide television. Worth noting as well is that starting in the mid-90s, Phoenix Entertainment opted to become practically the only animation studio ever to produce full-blown pornographic yaoi OVAs. Seriously, as much BL as gets adapted to animation, yaoi porn in animation is an incredible rarity, and Phoenix Entertainment would produce 3 entries into the genre, starting with The Legend of the Blue Wolves in 1996, which clearly had some production put behind it, so kudos to them for entirely cornering the market on yaoi and using it as an excuse to stay alive, all the way into 2007 with the production of Close the Last Door. 2 years after their website had last been updated, and 3 years after their last prior production of the yaoi OVA Sensitive Pornograph. Before that, their only 2000s work was the Urotsuki, which obviously represents one last return to the Toshio Maeda well for 3 more episodes. But for all intents and purposes, I think Phoenix Entertainment spiritually died in 2000, and I'm going to try and get to the heart of what did it in. It's hard to say what Giant Robo might have done to Phoenix Entertainment financially with its overlong production, but the studio did put out another set of 2 50-minute OVAs from another interesting director in the form of Shin Kaitei Gunkan. This one is about a submarine in the wake of World War II and comes from the same director as Doomed Megalopolis, The Big O, King of Thorn, Argento Soma, and episode 33 of the Studio Kara Animators Expo, who also served as the animation director and storyboarder on Giant Robo, and was an assistant director on Nazca of the Valley of the Wind. Kazuyoshi Katayama really deserves his own video, but this is the last of his intersections with Phoenix Entertainment. So, I said he was the director of Dune Megalopolis here in the script. Since then, I've come to realize he just directed one of the episodes. The overall director was Rintaro. But, you know, people on Discord who heard me saying that I might make a video involving Dune Megalopolis, that's the video I was talking about. Anyway. In 1998, with Giant Robo finally completed and behind them, Phoenix Entertainment seemed to be ready to get right into some big new projects, including yet another long-form series of OVAs and a 26-episode TV sports anime. The show in question was Princess Nine, actually a very innocent and slice-of-lifey show about a high school girls' baseball team. Oh, I fucking left out the word A there. It was directed by Tomomi Mochizuki, who by this point had directed Studio Ghibli's TV movie Ocean Waves, a Kimagure Orange Road film, a cult-beloved 6-episode OVA called Here is Greenwood, the first and best season of Ranma 1/2, and parts of Mai Sonikoku, episodes of Touch and Creamy Mommy, and he downright created the magical idol series Fancy Lala. Right after Princess Nine, he was going to handle parts of Yokohama Shopping Log and Twin Spica, and would later direct House of Five Leaves, along with Pupa and Battery. Yeah, weirdly he's got plenty of flops of just unmemorable shit all throughout his catalog, and some baffling decisions. He wrote the script of friggin' Toka Gatan, the porn tie-in show that told its story entirely backwards. Weird shit. Just gonna upload this last video here. 87, there we go. Alright, now they're all set to upload. Princess Nine is a cult favorite that always got decent reviews in magazines of the time, but I don't think it really took off. They had a manga tie-in and the anime came to America, but it certainly wasn't a hit here. Sports anime has always struggled to make an impact in the USA, and since the series didn't get any continuations in Japan in the way that most successful sports anime tend to. Maybe it was never intended to run past episode 26, but it certainly doesn't seem to have been the studio's biggest success. But at long last, it's time for us to address the ostensibly actual subject of this video, 1998's Ninja Resurrection. If Giant Robo's production didn't kill Phoenix Entertainment, and Princess Nine's lack of relative success didn't do it, I have to imagine that the downfall either started with the controversial branding and cancellation of Ninja Resurrection, or that 2000's Sin the Movie did the deed entirely on its own. But we'll get to that later. In a certain sense, the production of Ninja Resurrection made plenty of sense. Phoenix Entertainment had built their success on 2 backs: high-effort, aesthetically interesting OVAs, even in an era where those were barely getting made by anyone, and the extreme Eroguro sex and violence. While Urotsuki Doji is kind of trashy pornography by comparison to literary Eroguro, there had been an incredibly successful live-action movie which stood on the strength... There had been an incredibly successful action movie which stood on the strength of its powerful visual aesthetic and intense scenes of sex and violence in 1993 called Ninja Scroll. Ninja Scroll is clearly inspired by the Eroguro ninja works of Futaro Yamada, with its main character Jubei Kibagami sharing part of his name with the famous Jubei Yagyu character from those books. The first of the Jubei books is called Yagyu Ninpucho, whereas Ninja Scroll's Japanese title is Jubei Ninpucho. As such, Ninja Scroll is not actually an adaptation of one of Yamada's stories. It has about as much to do with the original stories as Django Unchained has to do with the original Django film. More than anything, Ninja Scroll is ultimately seen mostly as the visionary work of genius director and visual artist Yoshiaki Kawajiri, and its consistently phenomenal visuals and airtight screenplay have given it recognition as a nearly flawless animated masterpiece. While its fusion of 80s action movie machismo into the horror-infused traditions of Eroguro and intense depictions of titillating sexual violence will probably keep it from commanding the same respect that Ghost in the Shell and Akira have maintained over the decades, it cannot be understated the impact that this film had on the American audience, for many of whom it was the first thing they'd ever seen which was anywhere remotely close to this intense in the world of animation. If you were already a fan of schlocky gore films, it was like a gift from God. As mentioned before, Urotsuki Doji from Phoenix Productions had been extremely important for many of the same reasons as Ninja Scroll, even if it wasn't quite as accessible or respectable of a film. Still, Phoenix and its core staff had put together one of the richest OVA experiences of the 90s with Giant Robo, and there was no reason not to think that there might be enough talent between the staff members, even without Yasuhiro Imagawa or Tomomi Mochizuki around, and without having to rely on adapting the works of Toshio Maeda. The idea of Giant Robo animation director Yasunori Urata stepping into the director's chair to create a visually driven, high-quality, multi-part adaptation of a Futaro Yamada novel sounds relatively promising, especially to someone excited about more works being adapted in the same spirit as Ninja Scroll. It gets even more exciting when you start to have a look at it and quickly notice what feels like a strong influence from Hellboy author Mike Mignola. This influence crops up in some surprising places across Japanese media. Cult-beloved manga author Domon Seimon, for instance, cites Mignola as a primary influence, but his work is often also paid homage to in the works of Studio Shaft and director Akiyuki Shinbo. Interviews with Shaft staffers have mentioned the popularity of Mignola's work amid certain key members of the studio, and I can't imagine that it's a coincidence that Urata had been an episode director on Shinbo's Metal Fighter Miku, nor that Ninja Resurrection's character designer would later design the transformed heroes of Shinbo's Soul Taker anime. You may in fact have experienced some of Urata's visual fixations and Mignola influences if you watched the original Hellsing adaptation, as he directed that as well, and even handled episodes of the second JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OVA, for which legendary director Satoshi Kon also directed episodes. Unfortunately, Urata only ended up directing a small handful of works from 1998 through 2002, before receding back into minor production roles and eventually seeming to disappear from anime altogether. I don't know if Urata just gave up on directing after facing several failures, or if he just didn't enjoy doing it enough to continue, but we can get a pretty good sense of how his work contributed to the downfall of Phoenix Entertainment by looking at the two works he directed, which were neither another Toshio Maeda adaptation released in 1999 nor Hellsing, those being 1997's Ninja Resurrection and 2000's Sin the Movie. What caused Ninja Resurrection to get cancelled after just 2 episodes, released in 1997 and 1998 in Japan, and both in 1998 in America, I do not know. There could have been a lot of hype surrounding the series, considering that the legendary manga author and Getter Robo creator Ken Ishikawa created a manga adaptation of the same novel for release alongside the OVA. His manga concluded in the span of a volume, but the anime was just left open-ended after an assumable lack of success. Maybe the show was just too bleak and intense to sell all that well. As crazy as Ninja Scroll got, it never seemed to be going out of its way to just be as dark and heinous as possible, nor was it trying, as Resurrection clearly was, to be more gruesomely violent than anything else on the market. While it wasn't outright pornography like Urotsuki Doji, the sexual violence was just a touch more intense than Ninja Scroll, and it was clearly intended to be more of a horror story than a satisfying action flick. But when it came to the OVA's reputation outside of Japan, there was a massive elephant in the room, which, if you knew about the movie at the time, you've probably been absolutely dying for me to talk about this entire video. Ninja Resurrection, as released in America, was billed as a direct sequel to Ninja Scroll. While you can probably see the logic of this decision based on everything I've told you so far, and it almost certainly drove more attention to this OVA than it might have gotten without the name recognition, much of that was negative attention due to the fact that aside from sharing influences, Ninja Resurrection has nothing the fuck to do with Ninja Scroll. None of the same staff worked on these films, nor were they made by the same studio, nor were they even licensed by the same company. ADV had straight up ripped off the logo from Manga Entertainment's English release of Ninja Scroll and used the fact that the main character had the same name and a very similar character design to tie their OVA release into the narrative of a much more popular film released by a different company that has nothing to do with Ninja Resurrection whatsoever. Now imagine being me in 2002. A couple of years prior, I had been introduced to Ninja Scroll through an older cousin. And even though I was way too young to be watching it and never had seen anything even in the realm of that level of violence and sexual content before, the fact that it was all animated and had such badass action meant that I absolutely loved it. And my cousin Boyd, 4 years older than me, and a huge fan of slasher flicks, was completely absorbed in the film and led straight into the world of anime. So naturally, Ninja Resurrection was one of the first DVDs that he picked up once we had access to a DVD player circa 2002, and I distinctly remember him playing the second episode at my house and me shying away in fear at the scene of a woman getting ferociously raped by a monster man early into the episode. Everything else I gleaned was dark and horrifying, so I tried not to pay attention or stay in the room. It would be another year or two before I'd find myself properly giving the OVA a chance and watching both episodes all the way through. And that was when I became truly traumatized by the stark plot turns and horrific imagery in the first episode, and the absolutely insane ending of the second one, which ironically is all the more haunting and bleak because of the fact that the story was never continued. It essentially ends on the lowest and darkest point that it imaginably could have, and this has only increased the infamy and uniquely gross feeling that the OVA leaves you with after watching it. Make no mistake, Ninja Resurrection is indulgently and absurdly dark and brutal. It goes out of its way to show as much violence in as graphic of detail as it can imagine, and has no problem sexualizing rape scenes, even though they tend to be utterly horrifying. You could almost say that it stands somewhere in between Ninja Scroll and Urotsuki Doji on the intensity scale, but whereas Ninja Scroll is still on some level a fun and relatively lighthearted action flick, and Urotsuki Doji is so preposterous and over the top as to be hilarious sometimes, Ninja Resurrection is just an onslaught of darkness and grimness. I probably would still hate it for that today, if not for the fact that its visual tone is just so fascinating. Revisiting Ninja Resurrection with the visual lexicon that I have today, it's very clearly intended to be a horror series first and foremost, and I think it's very effectively horrifying. There's been this completely ridiculous idea floated around that anime can't successfully tell horror stories for some retarded reason, but this movie completely fucking traumatized me when I was a kid just as much as seeing the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre had. In particular, the scene which had stuck with me was when a demonic old man chops the heads off a pair of innocent children so that he can tell the messianic figure leading his rebellion that the enemy Yagyu Ninja had killed the children himself. This way, the man will become consumed with rage and unleash his full power, and even if he gets himself killed by the Yagyu's own ruthlessness, and even if he gets himself killed by the Yagyu's own ruthlessness to actually use those children's skulls as a distraction in the fight, he can still be used to impregnate the old man's daughter with the soul of Satan. Fuck! When I was a kid, the senseless murder of those children and the bleak way that their heads were displayed to the viewer had really fucked me up. Just thinking about it would keep me awake at night sometimes. But that wasn't the only scene which stuck in my memory from that day forward, because I hadn't even seen the completely insane ending of the second episode yet, which I'm just going to have to describe in full. So the last 10 minutes or so of Ninja Resurrection open on this very atmospheric and satanic scene of a woman about to be sacrificed in some kind of ritual. Attending the ceremony are 4 resurrected demonic forms of historical samurai figures who'd supposedly perished. We have seen them raping and eating random women and seemingly proving unkillable by the Yagyu Ninja Clan's scouts. Also attending is the demonic old man, who's pretty much been the direct force propelling all of the evil, crazy shit that's happened in the OVA so far. With the clash of lightning, the woman's body raises into the air and then clearly begins getting raped by some kind of supernatural force, in the sense that this is a kind of attractive woman having sex with a ghost. I suppose you could say that this is a fetishistic scene. When I was later 14 and very lonely and had no idea how to find porn on the internet, my spank bank basically consisted of any sexual imagery I'd happened to glean from any of the anime and manga that I've seen. Could thinking back on this scene and trying to parse whether it was more arousing or terrifying have caused me to develop an appreciation for Eroguro in the long run? The scene of a demon raping and eating a girl earlier into the episode certainly gives a similar vibe to the type of scenes which often occur in Berserk, and which are the one element which some readers tend to shy away from when appreciating that manga. Personally, all I have to say is to remind you that Urotsuki Doji is one of my favorite animated films of all time. I obviously don't give a shit anymore about watching demons raping people and tearing them apart, and frankly the last 10 minutes of Ninja Resurrection are rapidly going to reach an artistic level of absolutely insane gore and shock horror. The sexualized content of the rape scenes in Ninja Resurrection actually doesn't last very long. I wouldn't even be surprised that this contributed to the OVA's lack of success, considering how easily Phoenix Entertainment could seemingly go back to the well of pornographic Toshio Maeda adaptations. Very quickly, the woman's body begins shaking erratically, communicating some kind of possession. Then her body begins building and morphing as if getting torn apart from the insides, and it's at this point that the imagery is already grotesque enough to make the hairs on your neck start to rise in anticipation. Before long, a pair of hands start to emerge from her throat, clearly beginning to break her body apart. Parts of a body start to spring from her midsection and face at once, and soon her torso is just entirely split open, like a cocoon from which emerges the butterfly of what is unmistakably Satan. In the process of slowly emerging from this carcass, Satan basically ends up tearing her body completely to pieces. By the end of the scene, we'll see her essentially pulped on the ground, as Satan immediately shrieks hellishly in unending pain at the moment of his birth. And then, with a powerful swiftness, the second the screeching is over, Satan and all of the demons spring into action and take to the roof of the building, clearly fully prepared to jump into action and starting to do Satan's bidding in the name of taking over the world. From there, we cut to a crowded festival in what we would assume is a major city in this era of Japan. Satan and his 4 vassals appear amid the crowd and just start butchering them en masse. There's just like a solid minute of huge swaths of people getting torn to shreds at once, ending in the satanic crew spreading out to begin their conquest of Earth, and that's it! That's all you get! If you, like me as a kid, had no idea that this OVA had been cancelled, then you might have just assumed that in context, the ending of this OVA is that Satan fucking come back to life and takes over the world by just murdering everyone. Even though we only really see the beginning of this conquest, the concept is obviously still metal as fuck, and it had always given me the impression that this OVA was almost like a pure celebration of evil. The bad guys win, the main character has basically barely done shit at all, and wasn't even really the main character of the first episode, who had his arms torn off, then was raped by the daughter of his supposed mentor as he died, and then had the top half of his head left on top of a cross. This shit is just relentlessly fucking dark. There's also this whole extensive theming around the persecution of Christians in Japan at some point in Japanese history, which largely went over my head, but gave it a unique tone that was so distinctly satanic in a Judeo-Christian sense. Unique tone in that it was so distinctly satanic. When you think about it in the context of other stories which lean so heavily on Judeo-Christian apocalyptic imagery and feature intense demonic action and sexual violence such as Devilman or indeed Urotsuki Doji, the whole project starts to make more sense. Devilman had received several OVA adaptations in the late 80s and early 90s, and even though the best of those had itself only lasted 2 episodes, more in the vein of stories like it were certainly welcome to fans at the time. When you consider the way that Giant Robo was dedicated so heavily to the styles and stories of classic manga, it wouldn't be surprising at all if Ninja Resurrection had been intended to throw back to the absurdly dark and apocalyptic stories of Go Nagai and Ken Ishikawa, which would of course also justify the connection to Ken Ishikawa's own manga adaptation of the same story, which released alongside the film. When you think of Ninja Resurrection as the directorial debut of Giant Robo's chief animation director, which attempts to fuse the styles of classic apocalyptic manga, the whole lineage of demonic Eroguro and ninja mythology which owe their lineage to Futaro Yamada, and the color aesthetics of American comic book author Mike Mignola, driving comparisons to the influences of his art on the works of Akiyuki Shinbo, all at the behest of the same producers and studio who brought you Urotsuki Doji, the OVA is actually incredibly interesting, and leaves me honestly wishing I could have seen where it was supposed to go in the later episodes, and just how insane it might have gotten. It's at this point that I'd feel remiss if I didn't inform you of the single most badass scene in the entire OVA. I had completely forgotten about this from watching it as a kid, but I'm certain that this part is what kept people like my cousin Boyd returning to this OVA as something which they ultimately found some value in, even if it obviously was neither an actual sequel to Ninja Scroll nor nearly as good of a film. So as I've described before, early into the second episode, we see a girl getting raped and killed by a huge demonic man. Right after this, a demonic shinobi shows up to remark on how the other demon has been doing this every night, to which he responds that the shinobi had also been doing the same thing the night before. So, this is what these guys do. They just rape and eat random young girls all the time while they wait for Satan's birth. The shinobi points out that they are being watched and then throws a sword through the chest of the scout whom Jubei had sent to figure out what was going on in the castle. The demonic shinobi then takes to the roof to confront an array of other Yagyu ninjas, and the tension ratchets up as they suddenly emerge from the tiles of the building itself to take on the enemy. Though it is also suggested at one point that many of these ninja are just illusory forms projected onto small animals. Whatever they are, the demon allows all of them to plunge their swords into his guts at once, and sure enough we are treated to detailed shots of his intestines spilling across the roof. However, he is unkillable, and soon he begins to animate his own intestines, using them as tentacle whips. From here, the demonic shinobi proceeds to tear through a score of attacking ninjas, using his guts as swords in addition to the one in his hand, and this scene is what my people call in my culture, fucking awesome. So yeah, if any more shit like that was going to happen, then I would have liked to see it. The same scene appears to happen in the Ken Ishikawa manga, so maybe it's in the original book. If it is, then I would very much like to read that book. Whatever the case may be, this was just one of a handful of incredibly memorable visual sequences in the film, including the stark red and grotesque shots of just piles and piles of dismembered bodies impaled onto spikes at the end of episode 1. That is some album cover shit right there. Ninja Resurrection also leaves some pretty major plot threads hanging, which you'll likely start to think about thinking about more once you know that this story was left incomplete. At the start of episode 2, Jubei is portrayed as being friends with this pair of beautiful young women who are also the strongest warriors amidst the small village that Jubei lives with. Word comes from the castle that all young women are being summoned there, and this is what inspires Jubei to begin investigating what's going on in the first place. It's probably safe to assume that after the events of this episode, the Yagyu clan was going to fully mobilize an offensive on Satan and his forces, and Yagyu was also going to have to try and rescue the pair of young women from the start of the episode. Maybe some kind of tragically heinous thing would have befallen these nice girls, or maybe they would have emerged as heroes in their own right and saved Jubei's ass like the girl in Ninja Scroll was constantly doing. We have no idea because they don't show up again in the episode. We also never learn anything else about Jubei's weird past, in which his father, I guess, took his fucking eye out because he was trying to convince him that a true warrior doesn't need a sword to fight? Was that theme ever going to come up again? I have no idea. Episode 1 honestly feels like it was meant to be more of a prologue to the proper story, and Episode 2 feels like the beginning of a series which easily could have gone on for a while still. Obviously the book is out there, and even the short manga if we need a more concrete ending, but the anime was still its own beast, and who knows what ideas it might have had in store, even just visually. Alas, Ninja Resurrection stands today incomplete and underrated, with a sordid reputation thanks to its highly disturbing content and themes, bleak non-ending thanks to getting cancelled, and the dubious marketing tactics which ADV used to bring it to the West in the late 90s. Researching the project has certainly left me with a new list of interests and things to check out, and rewatching it definitely got me curious about the director and wishing we'd gotten to see him grow and evolve as a filmmaker. Unfortunately, his main other work with Phoenix Entertainment would be the 50-minute year 2000 film Sin the Movie, a tie-in to an American first-person shooter by Activision released on PC in 1998. Sin had a controversial launch, with bad loading times and glitches attributed to the launch having been rushed to compete with Half-Life during the holiday season, and may have hamstrung it from even being able to. The game was eventually patched and is even considered good by many, but it certainly didn't have the impact to justify some weird Japanese animated tie-in film, and said film certainly didn't have deserve the marketing push that I remember it having, with ads all over anime magazines. The plot of Sin the Movie is all over the place, as is the design sense, with the odd use of something resembling the original game's character designs. If there's anything going for the movie, it's that the scenes of intense violence are pretty crazy, And early into the film, one of the main characters of the actual game is horrifically killed, which I have to imagine would have been a shock to fans of the game. Maybe it's not too surprising that Urata's next work would be with Studio Gonzo, considering the odd fusions of CGI and 2D animation which are highly reminiscent of what that studio was doing at the time. Being a Western media tie-in was also in vogue at the time for studios which had been successful in the West with home video releases, such as Phoenix Entertainment had obviously done with Urotsuki Doji. But considering not only that the Sin movie kinda sucks, and the game was never that big of a deal anyways, and the anime industry was slowly moving away from the rental market into the TV and home video release markets, Sin just wasn't really the right project at the right time, and probably didn't amount to much for anyone involved. As stated previously, all that Phoenix Entertainment ever did after this was another Urotsuki OVA and the 2 Yaoi OVAs in the early 2000s before they went completely silent. Urata likewise only directed Hellsing, and then did episode directions on various early Gonzo shows, Negima, Eyeshield 21, Blood Plus, and a bunch of Rockman anime, likely as a freelancer, before disappearing from anime around 2007. If Urata has done anything outside of anime, or the producers behind Phoenix Entertainment went on to any other ventures, is beyond the scope of my research for now. I'd have loved to see Urata continue to develop his style across future works, or even to have gotten more of Ninja Resurrection, or at least more adaptations of the work of Futaro Yamada. All in all, I'm just extremely glad that I decided to reinvestigate this OVA on the basis of the strong reaction to it which I'd had as a teenager, and to have been pleasantly surprised by just how much there was to sink my teeth into. I'd like to think that my relationship with this OVA is positive at this point, and I'm glad for whatever fucked up shit it must have done to me by sitting around in my subconscious for all this time. There you go. That's the script of the worst anime of my childhood. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you look forward to the eventual possibility of this becoming a fully written, fully edited rather, video. Obviously, the script needs a couple edits in there because I have not gone through and fully edited it before making a video out of it. But there you go. My voice is dead now.